Among other public buildings in a certain town, there is one anciently common to most, a workhouse. And in this workhouse was born the item of mortality whose name is prefixed to this story. For a long time after it was ushered into this world of sorrow and trouble, it remained a matter of doubt whether the child would survive to bear any name at all. But once he was enveloped in the old robes that had grown yellow in the same service, he was badged and ticketed, and fell into his place at once, a parish child, the orphan of a workhouse, the humble, half-starved drudge, to be cuffed and buffeted through the world, despised by all and pitied by none. Oliver cried lustily. For the next 8 or 10 months, Oliver was the victim of a systematic course of deception. The parish authorities resolved that Oliver should be dispatched to a branch workhouse, where 20 or 30 other juvenile offenders against the poor laws rolled about the floor all day without the inconvenience of too much food or too much clothing. It cannot be expected that this system would produce any very luxuriant crop. Oliver Twist's 9th birthday found him a pale, thin child, somewhat diminutive in stature and decidedly small in circumference. However, it was his 9th birthday, and he was keeping it in the coal cellar with a select party of 2 other young gentlemen who had been locked up, when Mrs. Mann, the good lady of the house, was startled by the apparition of Mr. Bumble, the beadle, striving to undo the wicket of the garden gate. "Goodness gracious! Is that you, Mr. Bumble, sir?" said Mrs. Mann. "Susan, take Oliver and them 2 brats upstairs and wash him directly." "My heart alive, Mr. Bumble, how glad I am to see you, surely."
"Now about business," said the beadle. "The child that was half-baptized, Oliver Twist, is 9-year-old today."
"Bless him," interposed Mrs. Mann.
"And notwithstanding an offered reward of £10, and notwithstanding the most superlative exertions on the part of this parish, we have never been able to discover who is his father, or what was his mother's settlement, name or condition. Oliver being now too old to remain here, the board have determined to have him back into the workhouse. I've come myself to take him there."
The room in the workhouse where the boys were fed was a large stone hall with a copper at one end, out of which the master ladled the gruel at meal times. Of this festive composition, each boy had 1 porringer, and no more, except on occasions of great public rejoicing, when he had 2 ounces and a quarter of bread besides. Oliver Twist and his companions suffered the tortures of slow starvation for 3 months. At last they got so voracious and wild with hunger that a council was held. Lots were cast who should ask for more, and it fell to Oliver Twist. The evening arrived. The boys took their places. The gruel was served out, and a long grace was said over the short commons. The gruel disappeared. The boys whispered and winked at Oliver, while his neighbors nudged him. Desperate with hunger and misery, he rose from the table, basin and spoon in hand, and said, "Please, sir, I want some more." The master gazed in astonishment on the small rebel and clung for support to the copper. "What?" said the master. "Please, sir," replied Oliver, "I want some more." The master aimed a blow at Oliver's head with the ladle and shrieked aloud for the beadle. The board were in solemn conclave when Mr. Bumble rushed into the room in great excitement and said,
"Mr. Limbkins, I beg your pardon, sir. Oliver Twist has asked for more."
Horror was depicted on every countenance. "For more? Compose yourself, Bumble. Answer me distinctly. Do I understand that he asked for more after he had eaten the supper allotted by the dietary?"
"He did, sir," replied Bumble.
Oliver was ordered into instant confinement, and a bill was next morning posted on the gate, offering a reward of £5 to anyone who would take Oliver Twist off the hands of the parish. When, some months later, little Oliver was taken before the gentleman on the board and informed that he was to go as general house lad to a coffin maker's, and that if he complained of his situation or ever came back to the parish again, he would be sent to sea, there to be drowned or knocked on the head, he evinced so little emotion that they by common consent pronounced him a hardened young rascal and ordered Mr. Bumble to remove him forthwith. The undertaker was making some entries in his day-book when Mr. Bumble entered.
"Aha," said the undertaker. "Is that you, Bumble?" "No one else, Mr. Sowerby. Here, I've brought the boy."
Oliver made a bow.
"Oh, that's the boy, is it?" said the undertaker. "Mrs. Sowerby, will you have the goodness to come here a moment, my dear? This is the boy from the workhouse that I told you of."
Oliver bowed again.
"Dear me," said the undertaker's wife, "he's very small." "Why, he is rather small," replied Mr. Bumble, "but he'll grow, Mrs. Sowerby. He'll grow."
Oliver was awakened next morning by a loud kicking at the shop door.
"Open the door, will you?" cried a voice.
"I will directly, sir," replied Oliver.
"I suppose you're the new boy, ain't you?"
"Yes, sir."
"Then I'll whop you when I get in. You just see if I don't. That's all, my worker's brat."
Oliver glanced up the street and down the street, and nobody did he see but a big charity boy. "I beg your pardon, sir," said Oliver. "Did you knock?"
"I kicked," replied the charity boy. "I'm Mr. Noah Claypole, and you're under me. Take down the shutters, you idle young ruffian."
With this, Mr. Claypole administered a kick to Oliver and entered the shop with a dignified air. The month's trial over, Oliver was formally apprenticed. It was a nice, sickly season. In commercial phrase, coffins were looking up. One day, Oliver and Noah had descended into the kitchen.
"Workers," said Noah, "how's your mother?"
"She's dead," replied Oliver.
"What did she die of, Workers?"
"Of a broken heart, some of our old nurses told me," replied Oliver.
"You know, Workers, can't be helped now. Of course you couldn't help it then, and I'm very sorry for it. I'm sure we all are, and we pity you very much. But you must know, Workers, your mother was a regular right-down bad 'un."
Crimson with fury, Oliver started up, seized Noah by the throat, and felled him to the ground. Sowerberry returned at this juncture.
"Now, you're a nice young fellow, ain't you?" he said.
"He called my mother names," replied Oliver.
"Well, and what if he did? You little ungrateful wretch. She deserved what he said, and worse."
"She didn't," said Oliver. "It's a lie." It was not until he was left alone that Oliver gave way to the feelings which the day's treatment awakened in a mere child. Then he sat down upon a bench to wait for morning. With the first ray of light, Oliver arose, unbarred the door, and was in the open street. By 8 o'clock he was nearly 5 miles away from town, but he ran until noon. Then he sat down to rest by the side of the milestone. The stone bore in large characters an intimation that it was just 70 miles from that spot to London. The name awakened a new train of ideas in the boy's mind. London, that great large place. Nobody, not even Mr. Bumble, could ever find him there. He'd often heard the old men in the workhouse, too, say that no lad of spirit need want in London. He jumped upon his feet and again walked forward. Early, 7 mornings later, Oliver limped slowly into the town of Barnet. The sun was rising in all its beauty, but the light only served to show the boy his own lonely desolation.
"Hello, Mike Covey. What's the row?"
The boy who addressed him was about his own age, but one of the queerest-looking boys that Oliver had ever seen. He was a snub-nosed, flat-browed, dirty boy, but he had about him all the airs and manners of a man. "I'm very tired and hungry," said Oliver.
"Going to London?"
"Yes."
"Got any lodgings?"
"No."
"Money?"
"No."
The strange boy whistled.
Do you live in London? Inquired Oliver.
Yes, when I'm at home. I've got to be in London tonight, and I know a respectable old gentleman who lives there what'll give you lodgings for nothing, and never ask for the change, that is, if any gentleman he knows introduces you.
Oliver discovered that his friend's name was Jack Dawkins, and that among his intimate friends he was known as the Artful Dodger. As John Dawkins objected to their entering London before nightfall, it was nearly 11 o'clock when they reached Saffron Hill the Great. He caught Oliver by the arm, pushed open the door of a house near Field Lane, and closed the door behind him. The walls and ceiling of the room were perfectly black with age and dirt. There was a table upon which were a candle stuck in a ginger beer bottle, 2 or 3 pewter pots, a loaf, and a plate. In a frying pan some sausages were cooking, and standing over them with a toasting fork in his hand was an old shriveled man whose villainous-looking face was obscured by a quantity of matted red hair. He was dressed in a greasy flannel gown, with his throat bare, and seemed to be dividing his attention between the frying pan and the clothes horse, over which a great number of silk handkerchiefs were hanging. Seated round the table were 4 or 5 boys, smoking long clay pipes and drinking spirits.
"This is him, Fagin," said Jack Dawkins. "My friend Oliver Twist."
The old man grinned, and taking Oliver by the hand, said, "We are very glad to see you, Oliver, very. Dodger, take off the sausages, and draw a tub near the fire for Oliver. Ah, you're staring at the pocket handkerchiefs, eh, my dear? There are a good many of them, ain't there? We've just looked 'em out, ready for the wash, that's all, Oliver, that's all." It was late next morning when Oliver awoke. There was no other person in the room but the old man. After satisfying himself that Oliver was still asleep, he drew forth a small box which he carefully placed on the table. His eyes glistened as he raised the lid and took a magnificent gold watch, sparkling with jewels.
"Aha," said Fagin. Clever dogs, staunch to the last. Never peached on old Fagin. And why should they? It wouldn't have loosened the knot or kept the drop up a minute longer. No. Fine fellows. Having replaced these trinkets, the old man took out another and muttered, "What a fine thing capital punishment is. Dead men never repent. Dead men never bring awkward stories to light. Ah, it's a fine thing for the trade. 5 of 'em strung up in a row, and none left to play booty or turn white-livered."
For many days, Oliver remained in the old man's room, picking marks out of the many pocket handkerchiefs which were brought home. Finally, one morning, the old gentleman told Oliver he might go out, and placed him under the joint guardianship of Charlie Bates and his friend the Dodger. They were just emerging from a narrow court when the Dodger drew his companions back again. "What's the matter?" demanded Oliver.
"Hush! Do you see that old cove at the bookstall?"
"A prime plant," observed Master Charlie Bates. What was Oliver's horror as he stood a few paces off to see the Dodger plunge his hand into the old gentleman's pocket and draw out a handkerchief, to see him hand it to Charlie Bates, and to see them running round the corner. Suddenly the whole mystery of the handkerchiefs and the watches and the jewels and the old man rushed upon the boy's mind. Confused and frightened, he took to his heels and made off as fast as he could.
"Stop thief! Stop thief!"
A police officer seized Oliver.
"Come, get up!"
"It wasn't me, indeed, sir."
"Come, I know you. It won't do."
The offence had been committed within the district of a very notorious Metropolitan Police office.
"Are you the party what's been robbed, sir?"
"Yes, I am, but I am not sure that this boy actually took the handkerchief."
"Must go before the magistrate now, sir. Come along, you young gallows."
"Officer," said Mr. Fang, the magistrate, "what's this fellow charged with?"
"He's not charged at all. He appears against the boy, your worship."
"Appears against the boy? Does he swear him?" "Before I am sworn, I must beg to say one word," said Mr. Brownlow, which was the name of the victim of the Dodger's depredations. "Hold your tongue, sir," said Mr. Fang peremptorily. "I will not, sir," replied the old gentleman. Hold your tongue this instant, or I'll have you turned out of this office. Swear this person, and not hear another word. Swear him. Now, what's the charge against this boy? I was standing at a bookstall. Hold your tongue, sir, said Mr. Fang. Policeman, where's the policeman? Here, swear this policeman. Now, policeman, what is this? How do you propose to deal with this case, sir? Inquired the clerk in a low voice. Summarily, replied Mr. Fang. He stands committed for 3 months. Hard labour, of course.
Stop. Don't take him away, for heaven's sake. Stop a moment, cried a newcomer to the court. The robbery was committed by another boy. I saw it done.
Clear the office, said the magistrate. Officer, do you hear? Clear the office. Little Oliver fainted and fell, his face a deadly white and a cold tremble convulsing his whole frame. Poor boy, said Mr. Brownlow. Call the coach, somebody, pray. Directly, there's no time to lose. For many days, Oliver remained insensible to Mr. Brownlow's goodness. Weak and thin and pallid, he awoke at last. What room is this? Where have I been brought to? Hush, my dear, said a motherly old lady. You must be very quiet. Save us, what a grateful little dear it is. Pretty creature. What would his mother feel if she sat by him as I have and could see him now? Perhaps she does see me, whispered Oliver, folding his hands together. I almost feel as if she had. Are you fond of pictures, dear? Inquired the old lady, seeing that Oliver had fixed his eyes on a portrait which hung against the wall. I don't quite know, ma'am. What a beautiful, mild face that lady's is. Is that a likeness? Yes, said the old lady. Whose, ma'am? Asked Oliver. Why, my dear, I don't know. It seems to strike your fancy. Now the old gentleman came in. How do you feel, my dear? Very happy, sir, and very grateful indeed. Why, what's this? Mrs. Bedouin, look there. He pointed hastily to the picture over Oliver's head, and then to the boy's face. There was its living copy. The expression was so precisely alike that the minutest line seemed copied with startling accuracy. Where's Oliver? Asked Fagin, shaking the Dodger. Where's the boy? Speak out, or I'll throttle you. Why, what the blazes is in the wind now? Growled a deep voice. The man who growled was a stoutly built fellow of about 35, who was accompanied by a skulking dog. What are you up to? Ill-treating the boys, you covetous, avaricious, insatiable old fence? Hush, Mr. Sykes, said the old man, trembling. Don't speak so loud. None of your mistering. Well then, Bill Sykes, said Fagin with abject humility. You seem out of humor, Bill. Perhaps I am. Then he demanded a glass of liquor. And mind you, don't poison it, said Mr. Sykes. After swallowing 2 or 3 glasses, Mr. Sykes condescended to take part in a conversation in which the cause and manner of Oliver's capture were described. I'm afraid, said Fagin, that he may say something which will get us all into trouble. If he hasn't peached and is committed, there's no fear till he comes out again, said Mr. Sykes. You must get hold of him. Somehow it was done, and somehow Oliver Twist was again a prisoner of Fagin. It was a chill, damp, windy night when Fagin emerged from his den. He slunk down the street as quickly as he could, glanced suspiciously around, and struck off in the direction of Spitalfields. The mud lay thick upon the stones, and a black mist hung over the streets. The rain fell sluggishly down, and everything felt cold and clammy. It seemed just the night when it befitted such a being as the old man to be abroad. At the door of a house he knocked and walked upstairs. A dog growled, and a man's voice demanded who was there. Only me, Bill. About the crib at Chertsey, Bill. When is it to be done, Bill, eh? When is it to be done? Not at all, replied Sykes coldly. At least it can't be a put-up job as we expected. It's a sad thing, my dear, said the old man, to lose so much when we'd set our hearts upon it. Fagin, said Sykes, is it worth 50 shiners extra if it's safely done from the outside?
Yes, said the old man. Yes, my dear, yes, his eyes glistening with excitement. Is there no help wanted but yours and Toby's? None, said Bill Sikes, except a boy. I want a boy, and it mustn't be a big un. Oliver's the boy for you, said Fagin in a hoarse whisper. Well, he's just the size I want, said Mr. Sikes. And we'll do everything you want, Bill, my dear, interposed the old man, if you frighten him enough. I've had my eye on him close. Once let him feel that he's one of us. Once fill his mind with the idea that he has been a thief, and he's ours for his life. Oh, couldn't have come about better.
Later, Mr. Fagin wended his way through mud and mire to his gloomy abode.
Is Oliver abed? I want to speak to him.
The boy was asleep upon the floor, so pale with anxiety and sadness, and the closeness of his prison, that he looked like death.
Not now, said the old man, turning softly away. Tomorrow.
The night was bitter cold. The snow lay on the ground, frozen into a hard, thick crust as the sharp wind howled abroad. Such was the aspect of out-of-doors affairs when Mrs. Corney, the matron of the workhouse, to which you have already been introduced as the birthplace of Oliver Twist, sat herself down before a cheerful fire in her own little room.
If you please, mistress,
said a withered old female pauper, putting her head in at the door,
old Sally is a-going fast.
Well, what's that to me? Angrily demanded the matron.
She's troubled in her mind, and when the fits are not on her, she says she's got something to tell.
It was a bare garret room with a dim light burning at the far end.
Now listen to me, said the dying woman aloud. In this very room, this very bed, I once nursed a pretty young creature. She gave birth to a son and died.
What about her? Said the impatient auditor.
Aye, replied the sick woman. What about her? What about... I know. I robbed her, so I did. She wasn't cold. I tell you, she wasn't cold when I stole it.
Stole what, for God's sake? Cried the matron.
It, replied the woman. The only thing she had. It was gold, I tell you. Rich gold that might have saved her life.
Gold? Echoed the matron. Go on. Yes, what of it?
She charged me to keep it safe, poor girl, such a gentle lamb. The mother whispered in my ear that if her baby was born alive, the day might come when it would not feel so disgraced to hear its poor young mother named.
The baby's name? Demanded the matron.
They called him Oliver. The gold I stole was...
Yes. What? Cried the other. Stone dead, said one of the old women, hurrying in. And nothing to tell after all, rejoined the matron. It was within an hour of midnight. The weather was dark and piercing cold. Trembling and shivering, the old man went straight before the wind as every fresh gust drove him rudely on his way. Fagin, whispered a voice close to his ear, I've been lingering here these 2 hours. Where the devil have you been?
On your business, my dear, replied the old man.
Well, said the stranger with a sneer, and what's come of it?
Nothing good, said Fagin.
Nothing bad, I hope, said the stranger. They conversed for some time in whispers. They might have been talking thus for a quarter of an hour or more, when Monks, by which name the old man had designated the stranger, said, I tell you again, it was badly planned. Why not have kept him here among the rest and made a sneaking, snivelling pickpocket out of him at once?
I saw it was not easy to train him to the business, replied Fagin. He was not like the other boys in the same circumstances.
Anything but his death, interposed the other with a look of terror. I won't shed blood. It's always found out, and haunts a man besides.
I can answer for nothing, snarled the old man. All I know is that Chertsey affair didn't come off and nobody's seen the boy.
Morning drew on apace. The air became more sharp and piercing as its first dull hue glimmered faintly in the sky. At length a low cry of pain broke the stillness, and uttering it, Oliver awoke. His left arm hung useless at his side. He was so weak that he could scarcely raise himself, but urged by a creeping sickness that warned him that if he lay in the ditch he must surely die, he stumbled onward. Hosts of bewildering ideas came crowding on his mind. He seemed still to be walking between Sykes and Crackit, the safe-breaker. Then he was alone with Sykes. Suddenly he started back at the report of firearms. There rose into the air loud cries and shouts. Lights gleamed before his eyes. All was noise and tumult as some unseen hand bore him hurriedly away. He roused himself and saw a house, which perhaps he could reach. He pushed against the garden gate. It was unlocked and swung open on its hinges. He tottered across the lawn, climbed the steps, knocked faintly at the door, and sunk down against one of the pillars. Oliver's ailings were neither slight nor few, but at length he began to get better and to say in a few tearful words how deeply he felt the goodness of the two sweet ladies who so kindly had taken him in. "Oliver," said Rose Maylie, the younger one, "we are going into the country, and my aunt intends that you shall accompany us. We will employ you in 100 ways when you can bear the trouble." "Oh, dear lady," cried Oliver, "if I could but work for you, but I was thinking that I am ungrateful now." "To whom?" "To the kind gentleman and the dear old nurse who took so much care of me before." "Mr. Losberne, the surgeon, has already been kind enough to promise he will carry you to see them when you are well enough." Oliver's face brightened with pleasure. "I don't know what I shall do for joy when I see their kind faces once again." It was a dull, close, overcast summer evening. The clouds already yielded large drops of rain and seemed to presage a violent thunderstorm when Mr. and Mrs. Bumble, Mrs. Corney, that was, directed their course towards a scattered little colony of ruinous houses erected on a low, unwholesome swamp. "Hello there," cried a voice. "Is that the man?" asked Mr. Bumble's good lady. Mr. Bumble nodded. "Then mind what I told you," said the matron, "and hold your tongue." Mr. Bumble was apparently about to express some doubts relative to the advisability of proceeding any further when he was prevented by the appearance of monks. Signaling them to follow him, he led them up a steep staircase leading to another floor above. When they'd all three seated themselves, Monks said, "The sooner we come about our business, the better for all. The woman knows what it is, does she?" "What the hag told me about the mother of the boy you named," replied the matron. "Yes." "The first question is, of what nature was her communication?" said Monks. "That's the second," observed the woman. "The first is, what may the communication be worth?" "It may be nothing, it may be £20, replied Monks. "Speak out and let me know which." "Give me £25 in gold," said the woman, "and I'll tell you all I know, not before." Monks told out 25 sovereigns on the table. "When this woman that we called Old Sally died," the matron began, "she and I were alone. She spoke of a young creature who had brought a child into the world some years before. The child was the one that you named to him last night." The matron nodded carelessly towards her husband. "The mother this nurse had robbed in death. She stole from the corpse that which the dead mother had prayed her with her last breath to keep for the infant's sake. I judged that she had kept the trinket and then had pawned it, and had scraped together enough money to pay the pawnbroker's interest year by year. She died with a scrap of paper in her hand, and I redeemed the pledge." "Where is it now?" asked Monks quickly. "There," replied the woman. She hastily threw upon the table a small kid bag which Monks tore open with trembling hands. It contained a little gold locket, in which were 2 locks of hair and a plain gold wedding ring. "It has the word Agnes engraved on the inside," said the matron. "There is a blank left for the surname, and then follows the date, which is within a year before the child was born." Monk suddenly wheeled the table aside and threw back a trapdoor. The turbid water, swollen by the heavy rain, was rushing rapidly on below. Monks tied a leaden weight to the packet and dropped it into the stream. It fell straight and true as a die. "There," said Monks. "If the sea ever gives up its dead, it will keep its gold and silver to itself and the trash among it. We have nothing more to say and may break up our pleasant party." Nancy's life had been squandered in the streets and among the most noisome of the stews and dens of London. She was a member of Fagin's gang, a devoted slave to Bill Sykes, and had been the instrument both of Oliver's recapture by the gang and of Fagin and Sykes's attempt to turn him into a housebreaker. But there was something of the woman's original nature left in her still. She had set about to make amends for her sins by telling Rose Maylie all she knew about Oliver. She felt burdened with the sense of her own deep shame, and shrunk as though she could scarcely bear the presence of her with whom she had sought this interview. "Tell me why you wished to see me." The kind tone of this sweet voice took the girl completely by surprise, and she burst into tears. "Oh, lady, lady," she said, "if there was more like you, there would be fewer like me. There would. Is that door shut?" "Yes," said Rose. "Why?" "Because I'm about to put my life and the life of others in your hand. I'm the girl that dragged little Oliver back to old Fagin after he was rescued by Mr. Brownlow. I have stolen away from those who would surely murder me if they knew I had been here. Do you know a man named Monks?" "No," said Rose. "He knows you," replied the girl. "Suspecting this man, I listened to a conversation held between him and Fagin in the dark. A bargain was struck with Fagin that if Oliver was got back, he should have a certain sum, and he was to have more for making him a thief. Last night he came again. The first words I heard Monks say were these: 'So the only proof of the boy's identity lie at the bottom of the river, and the old hag that received them from the mother is rotting in her coffin.' Then he said that if he could gratify his hatred by taking the boy's life without bringing his own neck in danger, he would. 'In short, Fagin,' he says, 'old man as you are, you never laid such snares as I'll contrive for my young brother Oliver.' When he spoke of you and the other lady, and said it seemed contrived by heaven or the devil against him that Oliver should come into your hands, he laughed, and said there was some comfort in that too, for how many thousands and hundreds of thousands of pounds would you not give to know who your two-legged spaniel was?" "What can I do?" said Rose. "Why do you wish to return to companions you paint in such terrible colours?" "I must go back," said the girl, "because among the men I've told you of, there is one that I cannot leave." "But where can I find you again?" asked Rose. "Every Sunday night, from 11 until the clock strikes 12, I will walk on London Bridge, if I am alive." "Do not close your heart against my efforts to help you," said Rose. "I wish to serve you, indeed." "You would serve me best, lady," replied the girl, "if you could take my life at once, for I have felt more grief to think of what I am tonight than I ever did before, and it would be something not to die in the hell in which I have lived. God bless you, sweet lady, and send as much happiness on your head as I have brought shame on mine." Rose passed a sleepless and anxious night. Suddenly Oliver entered the room in breathless haste. "Oh dear," cried the boy, "to think that I should see him at last, the gentleman who was so good to me, Mr. Brownlow." "Quick," said Rose, "tell them to fetch a hackney coach and to be ready to go with me. I will take you directly to Mr. Brownlow without a minute's loss of time." Upon entering Mr. Brownlow's home, Rose, who had had time to collect her thoughts, at once related all that had befallen Oliver since he left his first benefactor. "Thank God," said the old gentleman. "This is great happiness to me, great happiness." He hurried out of the room. Returning shortly with Oliver, he said, "There is somebody else who must not be forgotten. Send Mrs. Bedwin here, if you please." The old housekeeper answered the summons with all dispatch, and Oliver sprang into her arms. God be good to me, cried the old lady. It is my innocent boy. My dear old nurse, cried Oliver. Leaving Mrs. Bedwin and Oliver, Mr. Brownlow led the way into another room, and there heard from Rose a full narration of her interview with Nancy. Rose explained her reasons for not confiding in her impetuous friend, Mr. Losburn, the surgeon who had cured Oliver when the boy had collapsed on her doorstep at Chertsey. The old gentleman considered that she had acted prudently. Rose had by no means overrated the measure of the good doctor's wrath. Nancy's history was no sooner unfolded to him than he poured forth a shower of mingled threats and execrations. "And what the devil is to be done?" said the impetuous doctor. "We must proceed gently and with great care," replied Mr. Brownlow. "Gentleness and care?" exclaimed the doctor. "Never mind," interposed Mr. Brownlow. "Reflect the object we have in view, the discovery of Oliver's parentage, and regaining for him the inheritance he has been fraudulently deprived of." It was nearly 2 hours before daybreak, and at this still and silent hour Fagin sat watching in his old lair, his face so distorted and pale, and his eyes so red and bloodshot that he looked less like a man than some hideous phantom, moist from the grave and worried by an evil spirit. "At last," he muttered, "at last." The bell rang gently as he spoke. He crept upstairs to the door and presently returned, accompanied by a man muffled to the chin. Sitting down, the man displayed the burly frame of Sikes. Fagin raised his right hand, but his passion was so great that the power of speech was for the moment gone. "He's gone mad," said Sikes. "I must look to myself here." "No, no," rejoined Fagin. "It's not. You're not the person, Bill. I've no fault to find with you. I've got that to tell you, Bill, will make you worse than me." "Aye," returned the robber. "Look sharp, or Nance will think I'm lost." "Lost?" cried Fagin. "She has pretty well settled that in her own mind already." Sikes clenched the old man's coat collar in his huge hand. "Speak, will you? Open your mouth and say what you've got to say in plain words. Out with it, you thundering old cur! Out with it!" After a short, furious conversation, "Hell's fire!" cried Sikes, breaking fiercely from Fagin. "Let me go!" "You won't be too violent, Bill? I mean, not too violent for safety?" Sikes made no reply, but pulling open the door, dashed into the silent streets. The robber held on his headlong course until he reached his own door, and entering his room, double-locked the door behind him. "Is it you, Bill?" said Nancy, with an expression of pleasure at his return. "It is," was his reply. "Get up!" "Bill," said the girl, "why do you look at me like that?" "You know, you she-devil," returned the robber. "Then spare my life for the love of heaven, as I spared yours," rejoined the girl. The housebreaker grasped his pistol and beat it twice with all the force he could summon upon the upturned face that almost touched his own. She staggered and fell, nearly blinded with the blood from a deep gash on her forehead. Then, raising herself with difficulty upon her knees, drew from her bosom a white handkerchief, Rose Maylie's own, and holding it up in folded hands as high towards heaven as her feeble strength would allow, breathed one prayer for mercy to her Maker. It was a ghastly figure to look upon. The murderer, staggering backward to the wall and shutting out the sight with his hand, seized a heavy club and struck her down. The twilight was beginning to close in when Mr. Brownlow alighted from a hackney coach at his own door. At a sign from him, 2 coachmen helped out a third man and hurried him into the house. This man was Monk's. "He knows the alternative," said Mr. Brownlow. "If he hesitates or moves a finger, call for the police." "This is pretty treatment, sir," said Monks. "From my father's oldest friend. What do you want with me?" "You have a half-brother," said Mr. Brownlow. "A half-brother whom you know, and whom you have attempted to defraud of his inheritance and his birthright. There was a will which your mother destroyed, leaving the secret and the gain to you at her own death. It contained a reference to some child likely to be born, the result of your father's connection with the only woman he ever loved. There existed proofs of his birth and parentage. Those proofs were destroyed by you. Unworthy son, coward, liar, do you still brave me? No,
No, no. Will you set your hand to a statement of truth and facts and repeat it before witnesses?
Yes, I will.
And you will do more than that. You will make full restitution to your brother, according to the terms of the will. Then you may go where you please.
In a foul neighborhood in the borough of Southwark stands Jacob's Island, surrounded by a muddy ditch known as Folly Ditch. In Jacob's Island, the warehouses are roofless and empty. The walls are crumbling down. In an upper room of one of these houses, ruinous in other respects but strongly defended at door and window, there were assembled 3 men who sat for some time in profound and gloomy silence. One of these was Toby Crackit, the housebreaker, accomplice of Sykes. The others were both familiars of Fagin's gang and den. Toby Crackit said,
"When was Fagin took, then?" "Just before dinner time," one of his companions replied. "You should have heard the people groan. The officers fought like devils, or they'd have torn him away. I can see him now, not able to stand upright with the pressing of the mob, and dragging him along amongst them. I can see the people jumping up one behind the other, and snarling with their teeth and making at him. I can see the blood upon his hair and beard, and hear the cries of the women, swearing they'd tear his heart out."
While he was recounting the horrible scene, a pattering noise was heard upon the stairs, and Sykes's dog bounded into the room.
"He can't be coming here. I hope not," exclaimed Toby. "No," said one of the others. "I think he's got out of the country and left the dog behind."
Suddenly a hurried knocking was heard below. There was no need to tell them who it was. The dog, too, was on the alert and ran whining to the door.
"Damn you all," said Sykes. "Have you nothing to say to me?
"Is it the body? Is it buried?"
They shook their heads.
"Why isn't it?"
he retorted, with a curious half-glance behind him.
"Who's that knocking?"
It was Charlie Bates, whose horror-stricken eyes fell directly on Sykes.
"Charlie," said Sykes, Don't you know me?"
"Don't come nearer, you monster." "Witness, you 3, cried the boy.
"I'm not afraid of him. I'll give him up, I will. He might kill me for it if he likes, but I'd give him up if he was to be boiled alive. Murder! Help! Murder! Help! Down with him! He's here! Break down the door!"
There came the sound of footsteps thickly and noisily in the street. Endless they seemed in number. Then a loud knocking at the door and a hoarse murmur from such a multitude of angry voices as would have made the boldest quail.
"Damn you!" cried the desperate ruffian. "Do your worst. I'll cheat you yet. The tide was in as I came up. Give me a rope, a long rope. I may drop into Folly Ditch and clear off that way."
He emerged on the housetop by the door in the roof. The crowd raised a cry of triumphant execration to which all their previous shouting had been whispers. Again and again it rose. Roused into new strength and energy, the man set his foot against the stack of the chimney, fastened one end of the rope tightly round it, and with the other made a strong running noose. At the very instant when he brought the loop over his head, previous to slipping it beneath his armpits, he uttered a yell of terror.
"The eyes again!"
And staggering as if struck by lightning, he lost his balance and tumbled over the parapet. The noose was on his neck. There was a sudden jerk, and there he hung. His dog, which had lain concealed till now, ran backwards and forwards on the parapet, howling dismally. The court was paved with human faces. Inquisitive, eager eyes peered from every inch of space. From the rail before the dock, away into the sharpest angle of the smallest corner in the galleries, all looks were fixed upon one man, Fagin. He seemed to stand surrounded by a firmament, all bright with gleaming eyes. He stood there with his head thrust forward to enable him to catch every word that fell from the presiding judge. He had scarcely moved since the trial began, and now that the judge ceased to speak, he still remained in the same strained attitude of close attention. At length the jury returned. Perfect silence ensued, not a rustle, not a breath. Guilty. The building rang out with a tremendous shout, and another, and another. It was a peal of joy from the populace greeting the news that he would die on Monday. They led him into the interior of the prison. He sat down on a stone bench, trying to collect his thoughts. To be hanged by the neck till he was dead. That was the end. To be hanged by the neck till he was dead. The fortunes of those who have figured in this story are nearly closed. Before 3 months had passed, Rose Maylie, who had been discovered through Monks's confession to be the sister of Oliver, was married to the friend of her childhood, the son of her foster mother. Monks retired to a distant part of the New World and died in prison. Mr. Brownlow adopted Oliver as his son, removing with him and old Mrs. Bedwin to within a mile of where the Maylies resided. He gratified the only remaining wish of Oliver's warm heart, and thus linked together a little society, whose condition approached as nearly to one of perfect happiness as can ever be known in this changing world.